We're gonna have a baby. Just when we were about to give up.
We're gonna go see the doctor.
He's a happy, healthy, normal child, typical child, reached all his developmental milestones on time. Right before his first birthday, he was walking, he was talking, eye contact, interaction, all that good stuff. He did have symptoms consistent with a severe adverse reaction at 6 months to the DTP, and it's in the medical records. Parents voiced questions, concerns regarding shaking episodes, entire body trembles. After he had those reactions at 6 months, he should not have been vaccinated again.
Marty asked what we're gonna do about vaccination.
That's a no-brainer.
What do you mean?
Babies need their shots.
And what about me?
What do you mean?
They vaccinate pregnant women too.
No, it doesn't seem right.
You still think it's a no-brainer?
He was a bright, precocious baby, the most precocious of my 3 babies, actually. Saying words at 7 months, speaking in full sentences by the age of 2. My personal reason for doing this work for the last 36 years is that my son, my firstborn, suffered a convulsion, collapse shock, and state of unconsciousness within hours of his 4th DPT shot at 2.5 years old. I didn't understand what I was witnessing that day. I didn't understand he was having a brain inflammation. He was eventually diagnosed with multiple learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, so severe that he had to be put in a special education classroom for 12 years. When I saw the TV documentary DPT Vaccine Roulette in the spring of 1982, I was absolutely stunned. I saw descriptions of pertussis vaccine reactions that exactly matched the symptoms that I saw my son suffer that day. I called the station and I asked to be put in touch with other parents. And we co-founded the organization that's known today as the National Vaccine Information Center. I I wanted to investigate pertussis and pertussis vaccine. I was insatiably curious about why a government policy required children to get this vaccine, why this kind of vaccine would be recommended and mandated. It never crossed my mind that a vaccine that was supposed to keep healthy children healthy would ever, in a million years, be able to brain damage or kill them. The doctors had been talking to each other in the medical journals for more than 50 years about how pertussis vaccine could cause brain damage and death, but they had never bothered to tell mothers like me who were trusting that a pediatrician would never do something to a child that would hurt that child.
Why would I need a hepatitis B vaccine? That's the order. So I was like, okay, I value my job, I get the hepatitis B vaccine, and got it and almost lost my life to it. To cut a long story short, turned out I had a full-blown autoimmune disease. I developed Graves' disease, but there was also massive damage to my nervous system. I couldn't walk anymore. I really struggled to talk. I don't think I slept. I mean, for weeks and weeks and weeks while I was pregnant. I just read and read and research and research and research.
He was taken in for an ear infection, and he'd been sick for 2 weeks. The doctor wrote him the maximum dosage of penicillin. As he's getting up out of the chair, says, time for his vaccinations. Are you sure he should get these vaccinations when he's sick and he's getting penicillin? And that was the fatal day. And after that point, begins to regress into autism. That was the fatal day.
It never crossed my mind.
After he had those reactions at 6 months, he should not have been vaccinated again.
That's a no-brainer.
A vaccine that was supposed to keep healthy children healthy would ever be able to brain damage or kill them. I was insatiably curious. Insatiably curious.
I don't think I slept. I mean, for weeks and weeks and weeks while I was pregnant. I just read and read and research and research and research.
No, babe, I don't believe it. You are getting yourself all worked up over nothing. Okay, what about polio, for God's sake?
Legitimately question vaccine safety. In 2002, when my son was first diagnosed with autism, and I first heard the theory that vaccines cause autism, I didn't believe it. I had a lot to learn.
We met with congressmen up on the Hill and said, this is wrong. This vaccine needs to be taken off the market. There needs to be a safer version of this vaccine. Why are these vaccines being mandated?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a reasonable question. What about,
Polio.
yeah.
You know, you asked me about polio. You got to go back a long way to answer that one. 1955 to this guy, Dr. Julius Youngner, co-inventor of the inactivated polio vaccine.
Yeah, the one that protected us when we were kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having met some of the world's great vaccinologists, I must say I have great admiration for Julius Youngner, who I thought was a very simple, sincere, and brilliant man. Youngner had developed 3 important technologies for assuring the safety of the inactivated polio vaccine. He began to hear that the Cutter laboratories in California were failing on all these levels. And so he went himself to the Cutter labs, and he was completely shocked at the shoddy level of production. And he told Jonas Salk that the Cutter lab was absolutely a risk to paralyze children with their vaccine, and he called for them to shut it down. And Youngner wrote a letter to the Cutter's lab to that effect. Very strong letter. Jonas Salk told Youngner, yes, you're absolutely right. It's terrible what's happening in Oakland, but you shouldn't send the letter because I'm better known as the head of the entire operation here. I'll send the letter.
And?
Salk never sent the letter.
And Youngner wasn't the only one worried about that vaccine.
In particular, Bernice Eddy at the National Institutes of Health, who had charge of testing monkeys, injecting them with the product of 6 different laboratories that had been chosen to mass produce the Salk-Youngner inactivated polio vaccine, began to find that the very sloppy methods were resulting in highly virulent viral particles in the shots that were being administered to her monkeys. And the monkeys were becoming paralyzed at an extraordinarily high rate. She sent her data to her superiors, and her superiors ignored them. She then took photographs of the paralyzed monkeys, terribly wrenching photographs, and they ignored that as well.
In fact, over 200,000 American children were administered a defective polio vaccine. Approximately 40,000 children contracted polio, 200 were paralyzed, and 10 died. It turns out that Qatar knew that many of the vaccines were defective.
A man-made polio epidemic.
And something I never considered, vaccinated children can spread polio.
This caused a polio epidemic amongst the families and communities where the children received a defective vaccine.
Of those who came in contact with vaccinated children, 113 were paralyzed and 5 died.
It came as a stunning reversal of public perception, of media support, and it caused a profound panic at the Centers for Disease Control at the National Institutes of Health. Imagine if you are a polio vaccine developer or expert at the national academies and you get a call at midnight on April 26th, 1955, and you're summoned to a secret meeting to decide whether or not you suspend this miraculous vaccine. And there was bitter disagreement about whether or not the vaccine had caused these injuries, and they quickly determined it was.
That's when the White House stepped in.
They halted all polio vaccines for several months, and they withdrew the Qatar vaccine totally from the market. They also lied. They had also found that 2 other manufacturers had live polio virus in their vaccines. But it was decided, apparently at a very high level, possibly even by the president himself, that that should not be revealed to the public.
Because
Because it was thought that that would permanently damage public faith in vaccines. And it had become very important for American foreign policy as well as domestic policy that people have faith in vaccines. And we know that from documents that were declassified in the last year of the Obama administration, showing that the Central Intelligence Agency had decided by 1954 that vaccine programs could be a way to enhance American influence throughout the world and also to keep up American technology in bioweapons.
wow, spooks. It's a whole new ballgame. See you later, babe.
The pressure that was put on these newly created virologists, vaccinologist superstars altered their judgment and caused them to commit what actually some called a quote-unquote horrendous crime.
40,000 children contracted polio, 200 were paralyzed, and 10 died.
Good. The client wants his extension extended, and the transmission on the truck is acting up. But, yep.
Babe, vaccine injury is real, always was. And there's another side, over $4 billion paid out by our government for damages.
Well, protection comes at a cost.
What about the victims?
Wait, did you just say that the government paid out?
Qatar was a real turning point. It went before a jury, the Godstinker case. Qatar's attorneys argued that injured children should not be compensated. Liability would stifle vaccine innovation.
Not innovation of safer vaccines. Surely they would be encouraged by the threat of litigation.
From a legal perspective, many of the injured plaintiffs and their families had an extremely difficult time seeking redress through the courts.
Is anyone surprised? Apparently, vaccines have become a bargaining chip in U.S. foreign policy.
So by this time, there was also a competition between the United States, the Soviet Union, and its allies in being the world's most generous supplier of vaccines.
This guy doesn't seem like a whack job.
And the problems with the polio vaccine didn't end with Qatar. Check this.
When Bernice Eddy made a second and even more fundamentally important discovery in the early 1960s, that all the polio vaccines were all contaminated with simian viruses. And that one of those viruses, called simian virus 40, was particularly dangerous and virulent, and very high percentage of the mice and other laboratory animals that she injected with this simian virus 40 rapidly developed tumors. This indicated to her that this was an extraordinarily dangerous cancer-causing virus.
Between 1955 and 63, over 98 million Americans were administered polio vaccines, widely contaminated with this cancer-causing virus.
By the early 1960s, as the US government began to identify itself, not just at home, but abroad, with the eradication of all disease, there was even more pressure on government agencies to give good news about vaccines and about disease eradication programs. We were going to create the health utopia.
A utopia that meant not troubling Joe Public with concerns about vaccine safety.
It had become a national political priority to promote vaccines and to squelch bad news about vaccines. And that was everywhere, and it involved every vaccine.
Remember the swine flu scare of 1976?
This virus was the cause of a pandemic in 1918 and 1919 that resulted in over 500,000 deaths in the United States, as well as 20 million deaths around the world.
Hey,
Real quick. January 1976, Fort Dix, New Jersey. Army Private David Lewis reports sick, ignored medical advice to rest, and ended up dying a few days later. Cultures from his throat swab grew an influenza virus that the CDC had down as some killer swine flu.
yeah, like that Spanish flu. Killed a bunch of people way back when. Hey, come on.
The game is more important. Like I'm painting the nursery pink or polka dots or something?
Okay.
No. This is not halftime entertainment when we've got work to do. After 3 more cases popped up at Fort Dix, the CDC recommended a vaccination program targeting 95% of the U.S. population.
That vaccine was called X53A. Was X53A ever field tested?
I can't say. I would have to.
It wasn't.
The vaccine was rushed to market with little attention paid to safety, except for the insurance companies that were asked to underwrite it.
And they said no.
Yeah. And then the vaccine makers took the position that if the government wanted the vaccine, then they should take on the liability.
Let me guess. Congress said no.
Production stopped, and companies refused to release vaccine stocks. Then get this. July 1976, Legionnaires returning home from their annual conference in Philly started dropping dead. It took the CDC 6 months to identify the bug responsible.
Legionnaire's disease.
Yeah. Meanwhile, a nervous public feared it was the deadly swine flu.
Within 10 days of the Legionnaire's outbreak, Congress succumbed to industry's demand for indemnification, and the government assumed full responsibility for all injuries that might result from the swine flu vaccine.
No liability in a free market. That just doesn't sound right.
President Ford signed the Swine Flu Act into law.
Well, few things motivate politicians like a plague.
The unmistakable subliminal message from the manufacturers.
There's something wrong with this vaccine.
Experts had determined that the Fort Dix virus was not the same as the killer flu of 1918.
So the CDC got it wrong?
Babe, there was no swine flu epidemic. And other than the 4 cases at Fort Dix, there was no swine flu, period. And that vaccine hurt a lot of people. By mid-October 1976, dozens had died shortly after vaccination. And many were disabled by a paralyzing disease.
Did you know ahead of time, Dr. Hatwick, that there had been case reports of neurological disorders, neurological illness, apparently associated with the injection of influenza vaccine?
Absolutely.
You did?
Yes.
Did anyone ever come to you and say, you know something, fellas? There's the possibility of neurological damage if you get into a mass immunization program?
No.
No one ever did?
No.
Your superiors say that you never told them about the possibility of neurological complications.
That's nonsense. I can't believe that they would say that they did not know that there were neurological illnesses associated with influenza vaccination. That simply is not true.
By December, the disastrous swine flu program was pulled. Benefits? There was no benefits.
Well, at least not to the public.
532 cases of paralysis, 58 deaths.
A wave of lawsuits followed. Thousands of administrative claims were brought against the U.S. government via the indemnification program.
And it cost the taxpayers over $220 million.
They knew that fear was a great motivator.
And it set a precedent for the industry to get immunity from product liability.
So I guess there were winners.
My first case was the Massachusetts case. He was born totally normal, no complications at birth. He made all of his motor milestones until after his second DTP shot, he developed a seizure disorder after going through a period of high-pitched screaming, and the mother described it as somebody was tearing his skin off. Dealing with the family and seeing what they had gone through and seeing the denial of the doctors, you know, as a young attorney just coming out of law school, I went after this as my cause.
This national publicity about the fact that DPT vaccine could cause injury and death was causing a lot of anxiety up on Capitol Hill. The vaccine manufacturers and the medical trade associations, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, were panicking. The argument that the companies made and medical trade made was government licenses childhood vaccines. They recommend for universal use childhood vaccines, and the states mandate childhood vaccines. Therefore, the companies and the doctors should have no liability. The government should assume all liability. And so this whole liability protection issue is as a result of government mandates.
The doctor knows that this is mandated by regulation.
So he has no choice.
So he has no choice, and indeed the parent has no choice.
Kids can't go to school without their shots.
Wait a minute.
What?
Well, there are legal mandates for child safety seats, but nobody argues that the government should assume the manufacturer's liability for those.
Huh.
The manufacturers had a more compelling reason. They were afraid of going into a courtroom, and that's the biggest fear that any product manufacturer has in this country, getting caught doing something wrong and being punished for it. In the early days of the litigation, we were able to get a favorable result for I would say pretty much 100% of the people that we represented, because they always seem to settle the case at the same juncture of litigation, of the discovery. That told me a story as an attorney. It told me that if they're willing to pay on these cases, there's something that I still don't know about. Discovery is where we get access to all of the documents that they have, and we can determine for ourselves what they knew, when they knew it, and what they did about it.
So I guess the real question is, was the DTP vaccine unavoidably unsafe? I mean, if the companies had done their best, they had a strong case.
Yeah, but if not, if they knew they could make it safer and chose not to, then a jury trial would be disastrous.
True. I mean, look what's happening to Monsanto right now.
As we fought for more documents, they would settle the cases very quickly.
Most of these lawsuits would be settled on the courthouse steps by the companies before they got to a jury trial. And as a condition of doing that settlement, all the court records were sealed from public view.
So what the manufacturers knew when they knew it and what they did about it remained a secret?
That all seemed to have changed in a New Jersey case. We were fighting over the documents. Letterly, at the time, was contesting that. They fought tooth and nail against giving them to us. We had to go back for 3 separate motions to compel. The judge gave them a very short time span, a couple of days to produce the documents.
Wow. Concerns about brain damage from the original pertussis vaccine date back to the 1930s. Even 50 years later, they admitted what they knew about the basic biology of pertussis was abysmal.
People would be outraged if they really knew how much they don't know about what vaccines do in the body, how much they're covering up about what vaccines do in the body.
I mean, it's no wonder they've tried to hide this from Hugo's law firm. Look at that. Internal memo from 1962, written by Dr. Christensen of Letterly.
It's obvious that severe neurologic reactions have occurred in children after pertussis vaccines, which have passed toxicity tests currently in use.
42 years had gone by between the first warning and the time the U.S. government decided to commission its first study. It was done by Dr. Larry Bariff of the UCLA Medical Center.
Because the Food and Drug Administration was concerned that this sort of public panic might spread to the United States, they wanted to document that the vaccine was in fact safe and not associated with severe consequences.
After millions of doses had already been given, someone finally did a safety study. Bariff's going to measure adverse reactions to 15,000 DTP shots, but only 1,500 doses into the study, he gets a surprise visit from Wyeth's Dr. Deach.
Wait, what is a Wyeth employee doing interfering in a government study?
Deach's secret report on that meeting? Bariff feels that the reaction rate for currently marketed DTP vaccine is unacceptable. Far from the expected incidence of 1 in 15,000 immunizations, there have been 1 in 300 generalized seizures and 2 collapse shock. Serious reaction rate? 1 in 214 doses.
The UCLA study found more reaction than had ever been seen before.
So, what happened?
Nothing. Nothing happened.
Babe, something did happen.
At this stage, when an unacceptably high rate of serious adverse reactions had been identified in the first big safety study of DTP vaccine, Bariff presented his alarming findings to the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA should have immediately suspended the DTP vaccine. That would have happened for any regular pharmaceutical product in this situation. But something very different happened. Following the surprising visit from Wyeth's Dr. Deach on September 6, 1978, unaccountably, the rate of seizures in the study fell from 1 in 300 doses of DTP to 1 in 3,563 doses. Rates of collapse shock fell similarly. Babe, the odds of this happening by chance are greater than 1,000 to 1 against. These new results were used to bolster confidence in the safety of DTP and reassure doctors that the benefits of whole-cell pertussis vaccine far outweigh the risks. And for what was soon to come, these results were used to persuade Congress that the vaccine makers had made the pertussis vaccine just as safe as possible.
How's the truck? Did they fix the transmission? Knock on wood, car insurance? Sounds like vaccine policy to me.
Yeah, maybe they just couldn't come up with a safer vaccine.
They actually started to study whether they could break the bacteria open. Do you need the whole cell, or are there certain parts of the cell that give immunizations? Conversely, is there part of the cell that is dangerous and can cause harm? The makers discovered that if they could separate the bacteria's beneficial and dangerous parts, they could make a safer vaccine, a so-called acellular pertussis vaccine.
So when did they know that?
1963. Eli Lilly had a safer version of the DTP vaccine.
Trisulgin is accompanied by a much lower incidence of systemic reactions than is observed with DPT containing whole-cell pertussis vaccine.
So why did nothing change? Why did an avoidably unsafe DTP vaccine continue to be injected into millions of children every year?
The fact is, we may have had a safer shot a long time ago.
We have had the capability to make a safer vaccine. The manufacturers have chosen not to for economic reasons. They want immunity from lawsuits. They don't want to lose the third world market because these vaccines cost pennies to produce.
In Japan, they've been using a safer acellular vaccine since 1981.
So why not here?
Vaccine manufacturers met again in 1982.
Well, Connaught's Dr. Stainer acknowledged that they could make a much less toxic product, but it was going to cost more.
Dr. Hsu, Connaught Laboratories, made the North American manufacturers' priorities very clear.
I would like to make a short comment on the issue of compromising between the price and the purity, because I'm from a company that produces vaccines, so we are, of course, very interested, first of all, with the price.
The reason they didn't pursue the safer vaccine came down to, I'd like to say dollars and cents, but I can't. I'd like to say cents, but I can't. I'd have to say less than a cent per dose to make it safer, and they were unwilling to cut into their profit margin.
So 1963 was the earliest they knew they could make a safer vaccine?
No, it wasn't. Letterly filed a patent on an acellular vaccine of lower toxicity in 1937.
Are you kidding me? 60 years before the safer vaccine was actually licensed? So what did they do with this patent?
I can't answer. I don't think anybody other than the folks at Letterly can tell you what was going on in their evil minds. They knew they could make it safer, but they didn't want to spend the money. What we had at that point was so damning to them. It was a path of years and years and years of deceiving the regulators, lying to the doctors, and that was what they were running from.
Okay, well, thank you for your time.
I think your transmission's working just fine.
I love you. They were clearly sweating. Since that documentary, litigation against Letterly alone was up over 400%. What was the corporate response to vaccine roulette?
Memo to all company employees.
The present DTP vaccine is the safest that medical science can now provide. There is no evidence that there is or ever was a vaccine with fewer severe reactions.
Liar.
And then there's this. The Pinto memo.
Pinto?
Yeah, in 1970, Ford Motor Company introduced the Pinto. It was a small car with a big problem.
If the car was rear-ended, the bumper assembly would crash into the gas tank and it would explode.
Ford was accused of causing up to 900 burn deaths because they were unwilling to spend just $11 per vehicle for a safer gas tank.
$11. This is an internal risk-benefit analysis. Recall and fix the problem, $137 million. Leave the car fire risk and pay off deaths and injuries, just short of $50 million. Ford made a business decision.
And then their memo ended up in front of a jury.
That's when Ford got sanctioned big time by punitive damages. The behavior of the vaccine manufacturers is identical. When the judge ordered them to produce those documents, it was like almost divine providence. They dumped 80-something boxes of documents on us one afternoon just before a weekend, and I looked at this completely filled up conference room, and I reached out and grabbed a random box, opened it up, and I pulled out a document. I found the Pinto memo for vaccines. If we kill kids, it's going to cost us $500,000. If we don't kill kids, it's going to cost us $1 million. Here's how much we have to price our vaccine at.
I mean, it does acknowledge that the public had been kept in the dark about problems with the vaccine. Beyond that, it's just another risk-benefit analysis. Do we stay in the market or not? 3 options.
Was the safer vaccine one of them?
No. Get out of the market altogether. Business as usual, but aggressively hike up the price to cover legal costs. Or seek liability protection from Congress. Get out of the market. Right. Apparently, to a jury, that would appear like an admission of guilt. Until Hugo's discovery, the preferred option was to stay in business and hike up the price by 6,000%.
That's aggressive.
But with this, once it got in the hands of Hugo and his colleagues,
They never let us see the light of a courtroom once we got this full set of discovery from them.
That's when the third option,
federal liability protection,
became the industry's lifeline, which they couldn't leverage once they'd shown they could make a safer vaccine. So they dressed it up as something very different.
And they would tell the public, they would tell the judges, they would tell their congressmen and their senators.
You need to protect us from vaccine injury lawsuits.
We can't make it safer, so you have to do something for us.
If you don't protect us, we're going to leave this country with no pertussis vaccine.
One of the biggest intimidation tactics I've ever seen a company do in this country.
A blackmail of Congress.
Corporate misbehavior, the profits over people and profits over safety. The effects have been devastating for hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of parents.
Congress decided they were going to create legislation that was going to protect the vaccine supply and contain costs. They came to us and said, you can come to the table and you can argue for what you think the children should get, but we are going to pass legislation to protect the vaccine supply in this country. We knew that the companies had to have a duty to make vaccines less harmful. We fought as hard as we could for 6 years to try to hold back 3 of the most powerful entities in society, government, medical trade, and the pharmaceutical industry, from completely removing all liability for vaccine injuries and deaths.
A group called Dissatisfied Parents Together, DPT. And they called and they asked me, Is there any way that the Trial Lawyers Association would get behind a bill that is essentially tort reform? I thought about it for maybe 18 and a half seconds, and I said, it's a good deal. It's a good deal because it's good for the people. It's not good for the lawyers. It's terrible for the lawyers. It's horrible precedent, but it's necessary because we're talking about brain-damaged children. $1 today is worth so much more than $1 6 years down the line.
It's safe to say that if a tort lawyer could go after the pharmaceutical industry the way they should be able to for all this damage, it would be a multi-trillion-dollar settlement. It would most definitely bankrupt the entire pharmaceutical industry. I think it's going to put our country under extreme challenge.
Henry Waxman and his co-authors on the bill were determined to get the act passed, despite pushback all the way up to the White House. And they weren't alone, but they were cutting it very close.
With only days to go before the congressional recess, the bill's passage was up in the air, with the White House declaring plans to veto the entire omnibus package due almost exclusively to the provisions in the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act.
October 20th, 1986, Los Angeles Times. Waxman made it personal.
If the president vetoes the bill, he will leave these children to fend for themselves and leave the country with risks or shortages or skyrocketing prices. If he vetoes it, I hope he has some emergency plans to start making vaccines himself.
Because the manufacturers tell us they may very well stop.
Just like swine flu, same playbook.
Yeah, now we know the real reason.
With the passage of the act, the 90s opened up an entirely new era for vaccination.
The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act had three purposes. First, to compensate infants and children who'd been injured by their vaccines. Second, to give some level of liability protection to industry. And third, to make vaccines safer.
With the act, Congress guaranteed children injured by vaccines compensation that would be swift, efficient, and generous, while at the same time giving industry a measure of protection from traditional tort liability for vaccines that both Congress and the courts have found to be unavoidably unsafe.
So the threat remained. I mean, despite the cushion of the compensation program between vaccine makers and a hostile jury, the lie that the DTP vaccine was unavoidably unsafe hadn't gone away.
No, not completely.
Here's the first case, Manley versus Health and Human Services. It went to trial in the new vaccine court in 1989.
So not really a court, babe.
We don't apply the rules of evidence that directly.
No judge, no jury, no right to discovery.
Our hearings are all closed to the public.
A special master appointed by the defendant? Our government?
Well, actually, the program got off to a promising start.
It was such a relief to be able to have this program. We were so shell-shocked and so bruised from 6 years of litigation in each case. When I tried the Manley case, which was the first case ever tried in the program, it worked. It worked. We had a death case that the child was diagnosed with SIDS, and it wasn't SIDS because there were certain things. The child was screaming and crying for hours before she went to bed, and she had a high fever. And the mother put the child down to bed that night, and the child never woke up. Within months of filing it in the vaccine program, we were done. They were paid. And it was a slam dunk. It was a complete slam dunk.
Not everybody was happy about the act.
Like who?
Officials at Health and Human Services, HHS, were furious.
They opposed the law to the bitter end. They did not want the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act passed.
To compensate children would have sent what CDC and the other powers that be at the time viewed was the wrong message, that in fact vaccines are dangerous.
The position of the Department of Health and Human Services has been that there is not as yet evidence that such a system is needed.
They didn't want to have the children compensated because every time a child is compensated, it means vaccines can do that.
In fact, Congress rubbed salt in the CDC's wounds by creating this,
Vaccine injury table.
a list of recognized vaccine injuries. Under the new law, these were entitled to automatic compensation.
There will be a presumption of causation in the absence of a more biologically plausible explanation for the child's injury or death.
Where there was doubt, Congress wanted those children to be compensated.
So, if you have a particular vaccine and a specified injury,
Within a specific time period.
causation is presumed?
Yeah. In court, you didn't have to argue an injury that was on the table. The discussion was only about the level of compensation. But if your child's injury was not on the table, then it was off table.
Meaning?
For these particular vaccine injury claims, the government places the burden of proof, the burden of causation, on the injured person. In most instances, this creates a nearly insurmountable burden for these injured parties.
You had guidelines on the table. We had signs and symptoms of encephalopathy on there.
Encephalopathy, any diffuse disease of the brain that alters brain function or structure.
Encephalopathy, brain inflammation, encephalitis has always been one of the most serious complications of vaccination. Almost all the vaccines that are recommended for children today can cause brain damage. We had signs and symptoms of seizures on there, collapse shock, high-pitched screaming, which is also known as the encephalitic cry. The doctors were furious because they wanted complete liability protection, and they didn't get it in that law.
Do you think doctors are warning patients about the risks?
No.
For the first time, doctors would have to give parents written information about vaccine risks and disease risks. The doctors would have to write down in the permanent medical record the vaccine's name, manufacturer's name, and the lot number of each vaccine given. Doctors were required to report vaccine adverse events to a federal vaccine adverse event reporting system.
What about the vaccine manufacturers?
The vaccine manufacturers were furious that they were not given complete liability protection. They did not get protection on the duty to make a vaccine less harmful.
Meaning avoidable injury.
Yeah.
We fought to make sure that that law did not eliminate all liability.
And the congressman who wrote the bill agreed.
If an injury is the result of a bad vaccine, or one inadequately researched, or warned of, then the courts can still make an award.
Worst of all, for the program and the government, injured children started getting compensated in large numbers.
It started out as so successful. I remember our first year, 92% of the cases got compensated. The vaccine program started to cost a lot of money. And then bad things started to happen.
The law as it was originally passed was a very different law than it is today.
In the early 90s, in the wake of the 86 Act, the vaccine schedule ramped up dramatically, and there were more and more vaccine injuries. And the name given to that injury was autism.
Please welcome Mark Waxel.
As the autism toll passes 1 million children and the cost soars to $1 trillion, there is a really pernicious idea that is taking hold, that there is simply no autism epidemic. The rate of autism in the world before Connor and Asperger first noticed children like this was effectively zero. So multiple surveys all showing sharp increases with an inflection point around 1990. 1 in 36 measured one way, 1 in 59 measured another way, now 1 in 33.
How had these cases of autism been adjudicated in the compensation program?
In the early years of the program, autism was being compensated. We saw those cases in Alder, Sorensen, Freeman, Banks.
Lassiter, Underwood, encephalopathy, autism, compensated.
And up through 96, 97, 98, about 95% of the cases were table cases, including dozens and dozens of regressive encephalopathy diagnosed as autism. In the first order, the judge said, we've always compensated these autism cases as table cases.
Automatically entitled to compensation.
What we found when we were able to contact the families is that about half of the families where the child had a diagnosis of seizure disorder or encephalopathy, the child also had autism. It was such a tidal wave because it represented such a threat to the vaccine program that it would have to compensate millions of individuals for a lifetime.
From the very beginning, the program was corrupted with the intent, the studied intent, of denying children the compensation Congress intended.
Of course, there's the obvious way to avoid paying out compensation. Just don't tell anybody about the program in the first place, right?
The Secretary of HHS is mandated via statute of the program to conduct public awareness campaigns. Yet they refuse. If we promote the program, people will not vaccinate.
I did not file because I didn't have access to the right information. I didn't know my rights.
And then to place a strict limit on the amount of time parents had to file a claim.
Normally, a medical injury to a child, the child has until age 18 or 21 to file their claims. So setting that at 36 months or 3 years was a deliberate effort to shortchange these children.
Like many families, by the time I had gotten access to the right information, we were past the statute of limitations.
HHS took a more radical approach to limiting payouts. They took the table and simply deleted serious injuries that had been entitled to automatic compensation.
There was a systematic gutting of the safety provisions and the compensation provisions at the hands of the Department of Health and Human Services.
So, 1996, the autism epidemic is taken off.
Yeah, and the government's liability with it.
Donna Shalala, Secretary of HHS and the defendant in vaccine court, took a red pen to the vaccine injury table.
Wait, so that's like the criminal getting to decide whether or not they committed the crime.
Oh, we don't need seizures on there. We don't need collapse shock. Take those off.
Take regressive encephalopathy, take residual seizure disorder off the table, thereby making it much harder for a child to receive compensation, as Congress found in their investigation.
The definition of encephalopathy was changed to one that you will never find in any medical textbook.
So injured children no longer qualified.
Congress wanted to make sure that all of the kids who were injured, because no product can be made perfectly safe, all of the injuries that were unavoidable would nevertheless get compensation.
Shalala turned that on its head.
Where that scientific research is incomplete or non-existent, the Secretary believes it would be inappropriate and inconsistent with her statutory responsibility to revise the table to establish a presumption that a relationship exists.
Wait, what exactly?
She should have done the science first.
Yeah, except that the autism tsunami was threatening to bankrupt her entire program.
Because of CDC's desire to protect the meme that vaccines are perfectly safe, the children were thrown into the netherworld of proving off-table causation, while at the same time CDC denied them the science necessary to do so.
But the act required science to develop a safer vaccine. I mean, who could argue with that?
Well, not even you, apparently.
When Congress passed the Vaccine Act, they knew that they were removing from the manufacturers any incentive to make vaccines safe. So they took that responsibility and they put it firmly in the lap of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Congress required a mandate for safer vaccines that the Secretary undertake a variety of research projects to reduce the amount of injury to children.
One of the key requirements of the Act was that HHS monitor vaccine safety and make a report on it every 2 years to Congress. In 2018, we sued HHS under the Freedom of Information Law, and they were unable to produce a single one of those reports.
The only way you're really going to know how much damage vaccines are causing is to look at people who've received the vaccines, people who haven't received the vaccines. Look at vaccinated children versus unvaccinated children.
That is done for every other medical product or device. In 2009, we actually had $16 million set aside in the budget for research to do this study, and CDC was so angry at the risk this posed to the vaccine program that at the next meeting of this research committee, they brought it up again in an illegal revote and took away the money. The director of this committee, Tom Insall, head of the National Institute of Mental Health, even said in a shocking admission that we can't do this study because we have a conflict of interest, because it might help the children win their cases in vaccine court.
They won't do it. They will not compare the health of children who are not getting vaccinated against the health of children who are receiving all the vaccines according to the federal schedule. This is too risky for them, because if it turns out that the children who don't receive vaccines are much healthier, the entire program is put into question.
We don't know how many children are dying or being brain damaged because we don't have a reaction reporting system that will give us those figures.
Do you think doctors are reporting reactions?
No. There's something very wrong here when we're mandating a vaccine and we don't even know how many children are being injured.
Parents forced HHS to set up a system to monitor vaccine side effects. It was called
the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System was an attempt to systematize the capturing of actual vaccine injury events. But the system is wildly imperfect to the point of almost being useless because of a Harvard Pilgrim healthcare study that was done. We know two really important things. The first thing we know is that less than 1% of vaccine injuries are actually reported. Of the people vaccinated, 2.6% had some sort of vaccine injury. That's not 1 in a million, that's 2.6% of the people who got vaccines. And so the lead researcher of Harvard Pilgrim actually complained because CDC went silent after they reported their results and wrote, "Unfortunately, the necessary CDC contacts were no longer available, and the CDC consultants responsible for receiving data were no longer responsive to our multiple requests to proceed with testing and evaluation."
A 3-year study produced results so potentially devastating for the CDC because the adverse event rate was so much higher than anything the CDC could share with the public. And so the program was shut down.
Look at this. And this.
Well, let's go to the source.
Parents were reporting regression of their children into autism following MMR vaccination, but it was a minority of children. So why some and not others? In 2000, I shared with CDC scientists my group's theory that it was age of MMR vaccine exposure. The younger you got the vaccine, the greater the autism risk. And to their credit, they went back to Atlanta and they tested the hypothesis that younger age of MMR vaccination was associated with an increased risk of autism.
And found no link.
There's something I think you should see.
My phone rings, and it's Dr. William Thompson.
You and I don't know each other very well. You have a son with autism, and I have great shame now.
A whistleblower from the CDC who's going to come out and say that the CDC had committed fraud on the MMR study and that they knew that vaccines were actually causing autism.
Two findings were buried on that fateful day in September 2002. The first was what we call the African American effect. The second effect was a group of children who received the MMR vaccination on time and then regressed into autism.
DeStefano and colleagues did find a strong signal of autism causation in these two groups, which was, of course, unacceptable to CDC.
Dr. Thompson tried to warn the director of the CDC at the time because he knew he was publishing fraudulent data. Not only was he replaced in the 2004 Institute of Medicine meeting by his supervisor, Dr. Frank DeStefano, who proceeded to show the fraudulent data, but he was threatened with firing, and he was told to seek psychiatric help because of his moment of clarity.
A real whistleblower, protected by whistleblower status inside the CDC, telling us we're committing scientific fraud in here. You know that same pharmaceutical industry that lies to you all the time and puts out products and gets sued and paid out billions of dollars? Yeah, same thing happens with vaccines, and we're doing that too.
After the whistleblower story broke in August of 2014, Dr. Thompson got cold feet, and he set about to debunk my results with a colleague, a statistician friend of his from the University of Pennsylvania, and they reanalyzed the data that I received from the CDC, basically to show that my numbers were an anomaly, that they were not correct, and they got exactly the same result as I did. They could not make the effect go away. They chose not to publish that information. By withholding that information, they're doubly committing fraud.
I mean, they could at the very least delay the MMR.
What? Admit there's a problem?
I started looking at the science, and it happened because I sat on the Board of Health for our county, and we received a memo that we were pushing back our hepatitis B vaccine from birth to 6 months of age due to concerns about mercury in the vaccine, that the symptoms of mercury toxicity were identical to what happened to my son, the loss of speech, the loss of eye contact, the peripheral neuropathy, the shaking of the hands, everything that he went through was almost identical.
I first heard about a possible connection between vaccine and autism when I was researching a story for Elle magazine. They wanted me to write an article about autism, and I heard about a mom in California. I knew it was on the increase, and I asked her why she thought that was, and she said, well, many people think it's the mercury in the vaccines. And I kind of dismissed it at the time. I said, how could there be mercury in vaccines? And if there is, it must be such a minuscule amount that it couldn't be harmful.
That's when I started researching my son's exposure levels and found out that at 2 months of age, his exposure levels were 125 times EPA's allowable exposure levels.
About 4 months later, the Homeland Security bill passed. And in the middle of the night, someone had slipped a writer anonymously into that bill, basically exonerating Eli Lilly from any civil liability in vaccine cases over thimerosal. And a lot of bells went off in my head. And I remembered that mom in California, she wasn't crazy. there is mercury in vaccines. Somebody's worried about it.
And one of the first things we started doing was filling out Freedom of Information Act requests or FOIA requests on all of our federal agencies, the FDA, the CDC, to find out if they were looking into this and what they were doing about it. And one document in particular was by an FDA employee who was talking about their vulnerability on this issue behind the scenes, saying that they had not done the 8th grade math to add up these cumulative exposures. We came across documents where the CDC National Immunization Program was actually doing research on thimerosal. On the study, the name Thomas Verstraeten was listed. And so I went down to CDC and asked him about his investigation. He explained how when they first started doing it, they made some changes to the entrance criteria because they were studying vaccines and they wanted to make sure the children that they were studying had actually been vaccinated.
Hey, so you realize that by leaving out the unvaxxed kids, they totally missed the crucial comparison between vaxxed versus unvaxxed. Those who got mercury and those who didn't. Anyway, all right, later, babe.
So they had done the crucial vaccinated versus unvaccinated comparison. Wait a minute.
This analysis became known as Generation Zero.
So the first runs of their data contained children who had not received any exposure at all to thimerosal, and they were comparing those to children who had received high exposures. The relative risks for ADD, ADHD, speech and language delay, neurodevelopmental delays in general, and autism were incredibly elevated.
Based upon the Verstraeten Generation Zero study, just a single dose of thimerosal-containing hepatitis B vaccine raised the risk of autism more than 7-fold.
In a court of law, anything above a relative risk of 2 applies cause and effect. So they were really worried about this. When you get up into the range of, 8, 9, 10, that's what we saw with tobacco science.
Wait a minute.
So clearly, definitely, unequivocally, you have studied vaccinated versus unvaccinated.
We have not studied vaccinated versus unvaccinated.
Oh, that was, okay.
She lied.
Stop there. That was the meaning of my question. You wasted 2 minutes of my time.
They brought in the vaccine manufacturers, and they brought in people from FDA and NIH and CDC, and they discussed essentially how they were going to handle this data.
What they had done was deliberately remove the unvaccinated controls, and therefore they brought the risk down.
You look at your findings and you don't like them, and then you go back and alter your entrance criteria. You can't do that.
I saw that one and my jaw dropped.
You do not vary the protocol once you see the results and don't like the results.
There was just manipulation after manipulation after manipulation. It was definitely scientific fraud.
Clear example of scientific fraud.
Dr. John Clemens from the World Health Organization made a comment to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, but this is the study that never should have been done because we already knew what the outcome was going to be. And that's a pretty shocking statement for scientists to make.
Some of the people within these federal agencies wanted to come clean with the American public and let them know what happened. But then these other voices of, quote, reason, the experts from CDC and some of the people within the American Academy of Pediatrics felt as though that was too dangerous. They knew that if this came out to the American public, that it would decrease their credibility. So instead, they did everything they could to hide this concern and put more children at risk for decades.
Well, at least they got mercury out of childhood vaccines, right?
Little did we know that as thimerosal was being phased out of the early infant vaccine schedule, that CDC was working on new recommendations that pregnant women, infants, and children receive flu vaccines. The flu vaccines that were available, over 90% contained thimerosal, that they would then recommend a vaccine during these critical windows of development that contain mercury was just appalling.
But Dr. Hooker, surely flu shots containing mercury have been tested for safety in pregnant women.
No flu shots have been tested for safety in pregnant women.
Is there any evidence that they can harm an unborn child?
Yes.
And these vaccines are still recommended for pregnant women?
Yes.
Then the CDC used taxpayer dollars to commission a Danish study of the autism vaccine link.
Danish? Are they even on the same vaccine schedule we are?
No.
The principal conclusion of that paper was that there was no difference in the incidence of autism in those children who received the MMR vaccine versus those children who did not. Now, this was done by statistical sleight of hand. The average age of an autism diagnosis in Denmark at the time was just over 4 years old. The children who were unvaccinated were followed up to an average age of 5 years old, and that captured that average age of diagnosis. However, if you look at those children who did receive the MMR vaccine, they were followed up until they were 3.5 years of age. They were followed up before the average age of diagnosis of autism in Denmark. So you would expect that if you follow up children for a longer time period, then they're going to have a greater likelihood of having an autism diagnosis. Fully 50% of the autism cases in the MMR vaccinated children were not accounted for. They were not followed up to an adequate age to diagnose them with autism. So the study was trumped up.
And there were 22 charges of wire fraud and money laundering.
More disturbing information surfaces regarding a medical researcher there. Allegations have surfaced that Paul Stossen stole millions of dollars from the agency, and now his study that attempted to disprove a link between vaccines and autism is being called into question.
No surprise the State Department hasn't extradited Thorson and put him on the witness stand.
By 2007, the compensation program was in crisis. There were 5,500 kids with autism alone that had claims filed against the government.
And it would have been tens of thousands had some of those claimants not been shut out of the court because of the shortest statute of limitations for children that exists in law, which is 3 years from onset of symptoms.
Families filed in the compensation program under two theories: that the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine caused autism, or that thimerosal-containing vaccines caused autism.
The government really and truly couldn't stand that. That could not stand the fact that autism was being associated with vaccination in the compensation program. So what did they do?
All of the damaged kids were grouped together into a combined legal action, the government against the children.
Of those 5,000 cases, they chose 6 test cases. Yates was the second test case. Michelle Cedillo was the first test case.
She's 23 years old now, and she still is very ill and requires a lot of care. She was born normal and healthy, and at 15 months old, she received her MMR vaccination, and then she regressed 7 days later with a fever and an encephalopathy. And she became very ill, lost much of her health and a lot of her skills.
Listening to this every day, listening to the doctors and the scientists and the parents, the evidence was so compelling. It was so much stronger than the counter arguments that there was no connection between the vaccines and autism, that I was hopeful.
At least one person listening to the evidence at those proceedings was persuaded to change his mind.
The day that I gave my oral testimony, I was in the courtroom, and as I spoke, I could see the other people in the courtroom, and I saw a gentleman with his head in his hands, and he kept looking down. The worse it got for Michelle, the more his head went down. Later, I was informed that that was Dr. Andrew Zimmerman.
Dr. Andrew Zimmerman is one of the top pediatric neurologists in the country in the field of autism. He was an expert witness for the government. He originally wrote an opinion for the government which stated that there is no scientific basis to believe that thimerosal-containing vaccines or the MMR can cause autism. The government used that opinion as evidence to deny Michelle Cedillo compensation. The government also used Dr. Zimmerman's opinion to deny compensation to my son Yates.
When it came time for the Department of Justice to have their experts, there was one person missing.
Special Master, I would like to mention one thing about an expert who did not appear here, Dr. Zimmerman.
They sacked their expert.
Dr. Zimmerman has given evidence on this issue, and it did appear in the Cedillo case. I just wanted to read briefly what his views were on these theories. There is no scientific basis for a connection between measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine or mercury intoxication in autism.
That was not his opinion. Zimmerman had changed his mind.
The statement by Mr. Maranowski regarding my expert opinion was highly misleading.
A respected pro-vaccine medical expert used by the federal government to debunk the vaccine autism link says vaccines can cause autism after all.
So later in Yates's appeal hearing, when the judge asked the DOJ lawyers whether or not vaccines can cause autism,
Sir, we're not even at the stage where it's medically or scientifically possible.
and that wasn't true just 2 weeks before.
Vincent Matanowski and Lynn Riccardella signed the concession agreement in the polling case, and it was based upon the opinions of Dr. Zimmerman and Dr. Kelly.
A $20 million concession to just such a probability.
That the Department of Justice thought it was ethical and proper to withhold that evidence from the omnibus autism proceeding, from the special masters, from the Court of Federal Claims, from the Court of Appeals, is unacceptable. It's an obstruction of justice, and it's a criminal offense.
As an Assistant District Attorney General, if I did in a court of law what the United States Department of Justice did, I would be disbarred and I would be facing criminal charges.
Matanowski was promoted.
Hey.
The key to Zimmerman's change of mind was a little girl that he'd seen at Johns Hopkins named Hannah Poling. She was a healthy toddler, had a vocabulary of 30 words, ahead on developmental milestones. Typical story. At her 18-month checkup, Hannah received 9 vaccines all at once. Immediately, it was high fever, rash, inconsolable crying. She started to lose speech, stopped responding to her parents. Eventually, she got a diagnosis of autism and seizure disorder.
Coincidence. That's what they always say.
But Hannah's wasn't just another story that could be dismissed by doctors. Her father, John Poling, Dr. John Poling, is a pediatric neurologist, and at the time was colleagues with Dr. Zimmerman at Johns Hopkins.
It happened to one of their own, and they very intensely studied this child, and based upon the advances in their understanding of metabolically what happened to her, they concluded that the vaccines did cause autism.
So this guy Zimmerman is the government's expert, and he was Hannah's doctor?
Yes.
What the American people do not realize is that Hannah Poling's case was to be the 4th test case in the omnibus autism proceeding.
So,
rather than losing in public,
the Department of Justice secretly conceded that vaccines can cause autism, and at the same time denied it in court.
The government avoided having to defend a case that they might lose, and that could severely disrupt the vaccine program. So I believe it was a strategic decision to concede that.
In his letter to the Department of Justice, Zimmerman describes how an underlying problem with the body's energy factories, mitochondria, might make a child susceptible to vaccine injury.
What?
Mitochondria. They're like tiny batteries that power every cell in the body. They're abundant in tissues with high energy demands like the brain. Zimmerman proposed that depleting the vital energy to brain cells by the stress of vaccination might lead to brain damage in some children. Lawyers for the Department of Justice quoted Zimmerman's theory verbatim in their concession on Hannah polling.
A concession that was clearly never meant to see the light of day.
Clearly.
In order for the government to concede the polling case and conceal it, they can't just write a check for millions of dollars. Under federal statute, they must prepare a confidential report called a Rule 4C report. The Pollings filed a motion for complete transparency. The Pollings wanted to help other people. The United States government absolutely stopped that.
I leaked a court document, a sealed court document. And I would go to jail to protect my source. I was astounded by what I was reading. I mean, it was a concession.
And here, in the leaked concession, Zimmerman's very words.
I thought there must be other cases where the child developed an encephalopathy within the prescribed time after vaccination, and then went on to develop symptoms of autism. So I asked HHS about that, and there were about 1,200 cases compensated for either encephalopathy or seizure disorders. And in some of those cases, the child also developed symptoms of autism.
We have compensated cases in which children exhibited an encephalopathy. Encephalopathy may be accompanied by a medical progression of an array of symptoms, including autistic behavior, autism, or seizures.
The Department of Health and Human Services conceded that my daughter's medical problems, which are autism, encephalopathy, seizures, were brought on by vaccination.
Yes, vaccines can cause encephalopathy. Encephalopathy can cause autism.
So the law said, you prove it. And the parents just did. So the government made a concession based on their own expert's opinion. That is huge.
The future of the entire program in the balance. And the Department of Justice's strategy? To keep their medical expert and Hannah polling out of court. Her concession is secret.
And they lied barefaced to the judges. It wasn't enough.
Well, listen to you.
Their problem, as I see it, with Hannah, the government conceded a new mechanism of vaccine injury. But they have no idea how many of the 5,000 plus autistic kids waiting in the wings have a similar mechanism, a mitochondrial disorder.
The government argues that this is an extremely rare condition. I don't believe that at all.
I started interviewing medical professionals, researchers who work with mitochondrial dysfunction. I discovered that mitochondrial dysfunction is much more common in children with autism than previously thought, much more common in general than previously thought.
Richard Kelly, who ran the lab, he says that up to half the children who regress into autism have mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yates also has the same mitochondrial disorder.
So, the Department of Justice had written a blank check.
And they faced a public relations nightmare. Parents have claimed for years that vaccines cause their kids autism. And despite public admissions, the government now point blank denies it.
It doesn't get any more mainstream than the guy that the federal government used to use as their expert witness agreeing with all the crazy parents.
Babe. It seems like our friends at the Department of Justice still had one card left to play. Here.
Somehow, over subsequent decisions, the theory by which that child, Hannah Poling, was compensated was changed. It went from an underlying mitochondrial susceptibility for a child that couldn't handle the stress of vaccination.
An off-table injury.
Yeah.
It became an MMR, post-MMR table injury, which is a very different proposition.
Hannah would have been the index case, would have been the first of an entire category, dozens, hundreds, thousands of cases that would be compensated.
Okay, I'm sorry, hang on. Just so I'm clear. Look, here in the original concession, and here, and here, and here, 4 consecutive court documents, all of them stating that Hannah's was an off-table injury. But then, all of a sudden, it's an on-table injury. Not a new one, not one that sets a legal precedent. No, it's just regular old vaccine brain damage, and our Justice Department just did that.
In the final decision that awarded damages to the polling child, there was no mention of mitochondrial disease, there was no mention of mitochondrial susceptibility, there was no mention of anything related to what was in the leaked document.
Right at the time that they awarded the $20 million.
Yeah, and the polling's when all of this made public.
But the government said no.
When does this become extortion of vulnerable parents?
So for the masters to misrepresent the polling decision itself as an off-table case and therefore not precedent is a devastating blow to a whole category of cases that are similar to Hannah Polling's.
Some of us brought other cases with children who had diagnosed mitochondrial disorders, picking up on and using the very theory that the government had endorsed in their leaked document.
The cases were denied.
I brought an argument that because the government had conceded that theory, they should be barred from saying vaccines can't do that.
Motion denied.
We raised that on appeal at least once, and it was denied. This entire theory doesn't exist. It was effectively eradicated as if we were in a George Orwellian type of environment where the government controls the facts.
It seems to me that the special masters must have known what was going on.
Collusion?
Meanwhile, the test cases and the thousands of other children waiting in the omnibus proceeding were deliberately denied compensation.
I was stunned and terribly disappointed at the outcome of the omnibus autism proceeding. And it was then that I realized that something had gone terribly, terribly awry.
The kids are just doomed. They're participating in a program they just can't win. And that's one of the things that just breaks my heart, is that knowing what we know now, the children in the autism proceeding never had a chance.
I am utterly persuaded that had a jury heard the evidence presented in the omnibus autism proceeding, that jury unquestionably would have decided for the plaintiffs.
Hooray, yay, now we've all lost. We've lost in the kangaroo vaccine court. We can now go to state and federal courts.
A jury, regular court, judge, discovery, everything that the vaccine makers fought so hard to avoid. Scrutiny of what could or what should have been avoided.
There was one sentence in the Vaccine Act, as kind of the poison pill, that said if the vaccination is unavoidably unsafe, you cannot sue the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, but now they get to see the evidence. Hugo's discovery, don't they?
On April 1st, 1992, at the age of 6.5 months, Hannah Bruzovitz received her third wholesale DTP vaccine.
She had a cold at the time, and in advance of her going in, Robbie called the physician to make sure it was okay for her to bring her in, and they said, fine, bring her in, we'll get this thing done. So she did so, and basically a couple of hours afterwards, she started to seize.
Up until that day, everything seemed absolutely fine. Hannah had excellent health. She was hitting all of her milestones.
Timing-wise, it happened 2 hours after she had received the shots.
15 minutes after I'd put her down for the night, she screamed out. I could tell that her lips were starting to turn blue, and I panicked at that time, and I immediately called 911.
From that day forward, it was pretty evident that she was having some difficulties, and the frequency in which she was having seizures was pretty constant. We were in and out of hospitals for the next 18 months or so.
As she was more and more difficult to control, we noticed that she was losing some of her skills, be it crawling, sitting, walking.
I actually found out about the vaccine injury compensation program through the internet. Certainly not from any physicians that we dealt with. The day after I found out was the last day that we could file our claim. What we ended up filing ultimately was for the residual seizure disorder that Hannah had.
Donna Shalala, the Secretary of HHS and the defendant in Hannah's case, amended the vaccine injury table midway through Hannah's case, coincidentally removing seizure disorder.
But Hannah's story is so straightforward. A perfectly healthy child suffers a seizure on the very day.
Within 2 hours.
Within 2 hours, being vaccinated with a vaccine that causes seizures. She's left permanently severely disabled, and there is nothing else that can explain those events.
Except for more coincidence.
So Hannah lost. Did they appeal?
Her lawyer, John Fabry, filed a civil product liability case in March of 2007. He argued that Hannah's injury was avoidable. Wyeth knew they could have made a safer vaccine.
And they'd known this for years.
Yeah. Fabry showed that Wyeth's decision came down to money, but it didn't matter.
What do you mean it didn't matter?
Well, the court ruled that it was all irrelevant because the act prevented the manufacturer's liability. So they were free to ignore the fact that they could make a safer vaccine.
But it didn't.
Hold on, because Fabry went further. He showed that Wyeth deliberately prevented Hannah from receiving a safer DTP vaccine. Some batches of the DTP vaccine were known as hot lots, and they frequently caused severe reaction.
Batches or production lots of the vaccine were shipped out in bulk, and therefore they ended up in the same places. So if a vaccine lot were hot and dangerous, the adverse effects would occur in the same place, the same town, same clinics, in a geographical cluster.
So for example, between August of 78 and March of 79, 8 children in Tennessee died shortly after receiving the same DTP hot lot.
Geographical clustering of severe adverse events could help rapidly identify dangerous hot lots of vaccine, preventing further harm, even death, to infants.
Okay, so
Wyeth has a totally different strategy. In August of 1979, Dr. Bernstein came up with a strategy for avoiding liability and for disguising and masking the dangers of the vaccine that they were selling at Wyeth Laboratories. He chose a corporate fix, and that was to shotgun all of these doses across the entire country, across their entire distribution network. Instead of sending one lot into Tennessee, they would send smaller amounts all over the country. They would never be able to detect a cluster because there'd be an isolated death in maybe 8 different states. Deliberately dispersing the dangerous vaccine would allow them to escape the blame and the financial liability for injury and for the deaths that occurred. Avoidable harm became inevitable.
And this is relevant because?
Because Hannah's was potentially a hot lot.
I called VEERS, and they were able to tell me about many side effects that some children have had from the same lot. I was appalled to hear that a couple of children had died and various other side effects, but yet they were still giving out this lot number of vaccine.
And in fact, our physician had mentioned in court that had she known about the hot lot element to the shot, she never would have given Hannah that shot.
Hannah lost in district court.
Did they appeal?
Yes. But the appeal court judges didn't seem to care about Wyeth's deception. And they argued, not unreasonably I suppose, that lot sizes varied. And until the size of a lot was known, the true rate of reactions couldn't be calculated.
No, this completely misses the point. Look, in order to do the calculation, you would have to be alerted to a potential hot lot in the first place. Otherwise, why bother doing the analysis?
Okay.
But since Wyeth deliberately prevented the hot lot alarm going off by dispersing the vaccine, it wouldn't happen.
Good point. But sadly, none of it mattered. The judges claimed to interpret the intent of Congress.
Wait, so the judges decided it didn't matter?
The Vaccine Act preempts design defects premised on the notion that the manufacturers could have made a safer vaccine.
No, it doesn't. Look, I read this whole thing start to finish.
Babe.
No, it expressly leaves that matter up to the judges to decide.
Well, and it seems that the judges were really, really rooting for the manufacturers.
Even a single company withdrawing from the market. The litigation difficulties that vaccine makers face, concerns about vaccine shortages, and the return of vaccine-preventable diseases.
Blah, blah, blah. It just gets worse.
Manufacturers shall not be liable for injuries caused by side effects that are unavoidable, except when the manufacturer engages in conduct that would subject it to punitive damages under the Vaccine Act.
The side effects were avoidable. And by concealing hot lots, Wyeth had engaged in conduct that would make it subject to punitive damages.
But Hannah lost.
Leaves only one option.
What was at stake in Bruisewitz was compensation for a generation of injured children, while at the same time industry facing bankruptcy from crippling tort litigation.
Okay, let's just go back a minute. What was the understanding? What was everybody's understanding of the act when it was passed?
Okay. Congressman Waxman, he agreed that design defect litigation was permitted under the act, and he wrote the darn thing.
Dennis Ross, Department of Treasury, the guys who have to pay for it. In his congressional testimony, he stressed the option of filing a tort claim in regular court if the plaintiffs found the compensation program unsatisfactory.
Here's the key. 1987. Robert Johnson, president of Letterly, urged Congress to make major revisions to the act to prevent his company's liability in the tort system.
And Williams, David Williams, Connaught Laboratories, predicts a devastating number of claims against U.S. manufacturers. Get this, on the basis that there were other safer DTP vaccines. They all knew that if the act passed, injured kids would get their day in court.
And then Wyeth pulled the same stunt that it used back in 1986.
If we are liable, we face a crushing wave of tort litigation and bankruptcy. There'll be no vaccines.
A lot of people have the impression that it's just a dog and pony show. What can somebody tell me in half an hour that's going to make a difference?
And they gestured towards me and said that if these losers, 5,000 losers from vaccine court, were allowed to access to state and federal court, that in essence it would be a threat to the nation's health and public welfare.
Persuasive counsel can make the difference.
In 2011, writing for the majority on the Supreme Court, Justice Scalia found that injured children have no right to bring a claim for vaccine injury for a defectively designed vaccine to any court in the country.
That majority opinion was absolutely outrageous.
The court's decision has granted an immunity to drug manufacturers not afforded to any other industry.
As the mother of a vaccine-injured child, I found the Bruisewitz decision appalling.
Our legal journey is over. The final verdict has been rendered, yet our daughter's condition remains the same.
Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor, they got it right.
Vaccine manufacturers have long been subject to a legal duty rooted in basic principles of products liability law to improve the design of their vaccines in light of advances in science and technology. Until today, that duty was enforceable through a traditional state law tort action for defective design. In holding that the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 preempts all design defects claims, the Supreme Court imposes its own bare policy preference over the considered judgment of Congress. Its decision leaves when designing and distributing their products, because nothing in the text, structure, or legislative history of the Vaccine Act remotely suggests that Congress intended such a result. I dissent.
And when that happened, essentially the pharmaceutical industry got a free pass.
I think that poses a grave risk to us all.
I caused part of this. I'm part of the reason for this. I will tell you today, I regret that to my soul.
Adults, homeschoolers, medical exemptions. I mean, they're after everyone. Could it get any worse?
Or better, depending on your perspective.
I think one of the poorly understood dimensions of the Vaccine Injury Act was that it transformed the vaccine industry in a corporate sense, in a competitive sense, and in a profitability sense.
The vaccine industry at the beginning of the 1980s was a $270 million industry. Today, it's a $52 billion industry. The WHO says that it will be a $100 billion industry by 2025, and all of that is because of the gold rush that was ignited when they passed FICA.
The way to determine whether a product creates money for a firm is to look at the stock market reaction. For the legislation, the market reaction was 0. After the legislation, the market reacted very positively to the licensing of a vaccine. They started making a lot of money.
What you have, with this high-tech, high-profit, patent-protected, high-growth business with mandated markets and no liability, you have this profit machine. But they're eager to add new vaccines, to get new mandates, to expand the scope, to globalize, to take these wonderful, beautifully profitable products and add to the list. And their challenge, honestly, is growth. Because if they can't grow, they're dead in the water.
Looks like they've done pretty well so far.
Up from 24 vaccine doses by age 18 in 86 to 72 now?
With this desire for growth, you see these companies filling up their R&D pipelines, and they have dozens and dozens, by some counts, in the hundreds of vaccines in the development pipeline. The approval pipeline is the constraint. The government agencies that influence the policy are the gatekeepers to the wealth creation opportunity for these companies.
The only stumbling block to profitability is the regulator.
The pharmaceutical industry has captured the agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from dangerous drugs. So HHS, NIH, CDC, FDA have all become sock puppets for the industry that they're supposed to be regulating.
People think the FDA is protecting them. It isn't. The FDA protects the big drug companies.
You have the watchdogs, the regulators, the investors, everybody that surrounds the supply chain of these new vaccines has skin in the game too and has a vested interest in their success.
One of the greatest problems with delitigation is that it promotes riskier products. A person is more likely to experience a vaccine injury than an injury from the disease that the vaccine is supposed to protect.
The only thing standing between that greedy corporation and that vulnerable little child today are the parents. And that's why we're seeing this drive by the pharmaceutical industry in every state and all over the world to eliminate vaccine exemptions so that they will have direct access to that market in this country of 74 million children without interference from their parents.
Why don't we see any of this on the news?
Maybe if they had known there was a vaccine to help protect me when I was 11 or 12, maybe my parents just didn't know.
All right, Mom? Dad?
What will you say? Don't wait. Talk to your child's doctor today. Learn more at hpv.com.
The pharmaceutical industry was able to use its influence over FDA to get FDA to waive the rule that once prohibited pharmaceutical companies from doing direct-to-consumer advertising of their products. That loophole's given the pharmaceutical industry extraordinary control over the American media. The pharmaceutical companies typically spend around $9 billion a year on media buys.
That box in your house is really just a pharma advertising machine that has some entertainment to keep you attached while they feed you this mantra that you cannot live without pharma.
The people that might be in place to shine a light on some of the corruption, on some of the injury, on some of the conflict of interest that is endemic in the industry, those people are running their programs based on pharmaceutical ads.
You can't report on American television without making sure it's okay with pharma.
They control the present. And who controls the present controls the past.
Many of you are having to switch over right now from Facebook to YouTube or to our website because for some reason Facebook is not letting our feed go live.
Okay, leading us off is controversy surrounding Robert De Niro.
The legendary actor responding to accusations of censorship after he canceled the premiere of a documentary at his Tribeca Film Festival.
I'm not 100% sure that was the right thing to do ultimately.
When that happened in Tribeca, I think that it was really a change of the age. Not only did they censor the film because they didn't, they had sponsors that didn't like it, they censored a film that the founding figure, Robert De Niro, came out and supported 3 days earlier and said, I have an autistic child. I mean, he put it all on the line, and that didn't even stop them. Robert De Niro didn't even matter. It was a really sad moment. I think film changed that day. That censorship at Tribeca became the biggest, media story in the world. Twitter had just started this new thing called Periscope, where you could broadcast live in a video on your cell phone. We just immediately had this body of live experience. And then at the same time that's happening, Facebook, we find out that Facebook's going to try and compete with Periscope, and they're going to have a live video app. And so then Polly's got 2 cameras going in every interview, and we got 2 cameras going everywhere we go, and our numbers are growing by the tens of thousands, people all around the world watching what we were doing. And we quickly designed a weekly talk show on Facebook. Let's step out onto the high wire. We wanted the vaccine issue to be in the mouths of the people. It's the only way we were ever going to change this, because the politicians are already bought.
Congress has been purchased by the pharmaceutical companies. This is an industry that spends more on lobbying than any other industry, double the next largest lobbyist, which is the oil and gas industry.
I didn't think they were going to go after our First Amendment rights. I figured they were smarter than that they would know that would start a civil war if you did that. But sure enough, we watched Adam Schiff suddenly writes a letter to Facebook and Instagram and Twitter saying, you need to stop these anti-vaxxers. This politician thinks we shouldn't have free speech.
vaccine injury compensation program has been an experiment in tort reform. I think it's been a highly successful experiment.
The 1986 compensation program has been a success for a tiny minority of those who are injured.
It was put in place for reasons at the time that seemed plausible.
One was to protect the pharmaceutical industry. That has succeeded beyond the pharmaceutical industry's wildest dreams. The other was to protect and compensate children. That has absolutely failed miserably.
The 1986 Act is one of the most
disastrous,
catastrophic pieces of public policy ever put in place.
Absolutely disastrous.
We have seen this enormous perversion of the original intent.
What has been done is tragic.
The most protected industry in the history of our country, wreaking havoc on a generation of children.
The vaccine industry is the only industry in the world where the federal government has had to take on financial responsibility to dole out money to injured people from that product.
If there is no liability, there is no incentive for safety.
Also given to the gun manufacturers absolute immunity. Imagine if I stood here and said we give immunity to drug companies. Immunity to drug companies.
I think the Vaccine Act of 1986 is the cause of the autism epidemic.
I don't see how you can outright dismiss 10,000 virtually identical stories from all of these mothers who saw what happened to their child and just say that never happened. That's not science. That's misogyny.
I guess most of you think that we know what our vaccines are doing. We don't. We don't. We don't.
Pertussis is back because we didn't completely understand how our immune defenses against whooping cough worked. We'd layered assumptions upon assumptions. We may have made some crucial errors.
Vaccines are very safe. If someone gets sick after vaccination, it is usually either a coincidence.
That's what they always say.
The DTP vaccine may kill more children from other causes than it saves from diphtheria, tetanus, or pertussis.
It's done more harm than good.
The UCLA study found more reaction than had ever been seen before.
What is a Wyeth employee doing interfering in a government study?
What really happened?
It was the summer of 1982, and I was concerned there was a link between pertussis vaccine and infant deaths classified as SIDS. So I called a senior investigator on the UCLA DPT safety study, and he said to me, "You're on the right track. Keep on going. But if you tell anyone I said that, I will deny it."
What really happened, Dr. Bareth? Did anyone even consider these things before they handed the industry a get-out-of-jail-free card?
It's gone rogue.
Is this even a safe place to have babies anymore?
Barbara Lowe Fisher. We hold them in wonder just moments after they're born. We love them in a way we never thought we could love anyone. And they love and trust us in a way that no one else ever will. And there is no power on earth greater than that love. We are here today to witness the suffering of children who have no voice and have no choice except the voice and choice that we, their mothers and fathers, give to them. Many of us who made the pilgrimage to be here know the pain of watching a healthy child die or regress after vaccination. November 14, 1986 was an historic day. We had been fighting for so long to protect the act from industry greed and government overreach that we never saw the betrayal coming. We did not know that the very same lawmakers sponsoring the act were already working behind the scenes to dismantle it. Today, the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act looks nothing like the one signed into law in November 1986. The biggest public health emergency in America today is not 1,200 cases of measles. It is the one being covered up by the government agencies working overtime with industry, medical trade, and mainstream media to distract, deceive, stonewall, and restrict the freedom of Americans to take back control of their health. If we do not get up off our knees, tomorrow we will not be able to get on a bus, a train or plane, enter a store or sports arena, obtain a driver's license or passport, file our taxes, or function in society without getting every vaccine that industry creates and the government orders us to get. When the state considers one of us to be expendable, then we are all considered expendable. We will not be silent. We will not go away. We will never give up. We are the daughters and sons of liberty. And our mission continues. No forced vaccination, not in America.
I have performed the study that the CDC did not want to perform. I have compared health outcomes in vaccinated and unvaccinated children. The health outcomes that we studied included developmental delays, asthma, ear infection, and gastrointestinal issues. I studied approximately 2,000 children, of whom 31% were unvaccinated by 1 year of age, and I compared those with the remaining 69% who had been vaccinated. It clearly demonstrates that vaccinated children had worse health outcomes compared to unvaccinated children. The children that got the most vaccines and got vaccinated earlier were at the greatest risk for all of these adverse health outcomes, and this demands further study.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is confirming the first case of human-to-human transmission in the United States of the novel coronavirus. They do still believe that the immediate risk to the American public is low.
For the world at large, normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population. There will be some risk and indemnification needed.
I never thought I'd see anything like this. It's a science fiction nightmare. It's Kafkaesque, it's Orwellian. There are not enough words that you can throw at it to capture the horror of what's happening.
This is a bomb that is being dropped on our society, on human civilization, on our economy, on our culture, on our democracy, on everything that we value by the vaccine industry.